Hi guys. Well, first of all, welcome to Form 9, and I hope all of you are taking care of yourselves and staying safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, I will be teaching you social sciences in Form 9, and the subjects I'll be covering under social sciences are history and civics. Uh, so this is how we're going to go about the chapters as we do online teaching here through the videos. I will already, or I would have, before we start, you would already have the notes with you. So they would probably be sent to you over WhatsApp class groups or via email. So while I am explaining, kindly open those notes. So while you're listening to me, you can keep looking at those notes as I explain them to you. Um, you can open those notes in your mobile, or you can simply open them on your laptop, whichever is convenient. Um, First, and secondly, I will also send a list of questions. So for civics, I will only be sending a list of questions along with the notes. They're going to be two separate documents. So after I finish explaining a chapter, you would have understood the chapter since you'd be listening to me, and along with that, you would also have your notes. So combining the two, I would then want you to have a look at those questions and try and see if you can solve them. This is what we're going to follow for civics. For history also, we're going to follow the same technique where before I start explaining in a video, before I start explaining a chapter in a video, I will send the notes of that chapter to you, and in a separate document, I will send the questions for that chapter as well as the timeline for that chapter. Remember, in history, we're going to have a lot of dates. I would want you to look at history not as something very difficult and just full of dates. In fact, just look at it like a long story. And we're going to study it via a timeline. So it's going to make it more chronological, and we'll then be able to categorize the chapter properly. So for history, I then want you to have a look at both the documents, A, which will have the notes, and B, the document which will have the questions as well as the timeline. So while I am explaining history to you, you can open two tabs, or rather two pages. One can be the notes and the other can be the timeline, and you can be switching between both of them as I explain. Yeah. Now to start with, for your civics in Form 9, in the whole year, you have a total of 5 chapters in civics. So if you have a look at your book, there's actually 6 chapters which are mentioned, but the first chapter is not in the syllabus. So we start with chapter 2 and then we continue to 3, 4, 5 and 6. So the chapter we're going to start with as chapter 2 would be called What is Democracy and Why Democracy. So in today's video, I will be covering that chapter with you. As far as your history syllabus is concerned, well, Form 9 history book is a big fat thick book, I know, but do not let it intimidate you. You only have the first 4 chapters in your syllabus. So the first chapter is the French Revolution, the second chapter is the Russian Revolution, the third chapter is Nazism and the rise of Hitler, and the fourth chapter is forests and colonialism. So that's the chapters we'll be looking at, along with some map work. Apart from that, each chapter will have a list of glossary or keywords. So in civics, at the end of each chapter, you will have a list of keywords. I want you to kindly go through them. And for history, on each page where there are new or difficult words, on each page in a little box, you will have the glossary or keywords written along with their meanings. So once again, kindly pay attention to those when you're having a look at your textbooks, which can very easily also be downloaded. The PDFs can be downloaded. All right. So now to begin with, we are going to start the syllabus with civics. All right. And like I've already told you, the first chapter is not in the syllabus. So we're going to start with chapter 2, which is what is democracy and why democracy. Now, just a moment. Yeah. Um, Now, as we dwell deeper into the chapter, one very simple idea is that or it's a very basic fact that we know, is that India is a democracy. We have a democratic form of government. Now, if I ask you what that simply means, well, one thing all of you know is that we have all elected the government. We have something known as universal adult franchisee, in which anyone, irrespective of caste, creed, religion, sex, color, anyone above the age of 18 has the right to vote for their representatives, and they do. We choose our representatives after every 5 years. Uh, so, in short, well, a democracy is going to be a form of government in which the rulers are elected by the people, and which means that the government is chosen by the people, and then this democratically elected government is then going to make laws for the people. So, here the government is not supreme. The people, the voters who are electing this government are supreme because they choose. Because in next elections, if they don't like their government, they can throw them out of power and get someone else instead. Very famously, it has been said that democracy is of the people, for the people, and by the people. In your chapter, so we're going to have a look at democracy. We've just seen the definition of democracy. We're also going to see the features of democracy. We're going to see the pros and cons of democracy. I mean, it definitely has a lot of advantages, but it also has a few disadvantages, which we've clearly been seeing in the history of our country ever since we've got independence. The problems a democratic government deals with. Apart from that, in order to show how, no matter what problems a democratic government has, a democracy is still the best form of government, or the most ideal form of government. To drive this point home, this chapter will have examples of a few other countries who are not democratic, and a few others who may call themselves democratic, but they don't behave that they are, or they don't behave in a democratic manner. Alright, so kindly keep looking at the notes as you listen to the video. Right, so we've already had a look at the definition of democracy. Now, what about the features of democracy? So the main features of democracy are that major decisions are taken by the elected leaders. There are free and fair elections, or there's free and fair electoral competition. There is the idea of one person, one vote, and one value. Then there is rule of law and respect for rights. Now let us have a look at in detail about what these features, these 4 features that I just stated out, mean. Major decisions by elected leaders. This means that all the people we've elected, the ministers that we've elected, the MPs and MLAs that we've elected, well, the MPs at the parliament, members of parliament at the center, sorry, they together will vote and take a decision. One person here cannot be acting like a dictator and taking decisions. To make things easier, think of a monarchy. In a monarchy, there is a one-person rule, the king or the queen. In a dictatorship also, there is a one-person rule. In something like aristocracy or oligarchy ruling, there's a group of people who are ruling. But in a democracy, now basically I said monarchy or dictatorship, oligarchy, aristocracy. The whole point is one man rule, a group of people rule, and in democracy it's everyone there together. These are just different forms of government. One is the proper form and the other is a corrupt form, but we're not going to go into the details because it's really not required. However, anyway, when we come to democracy, we see that everyone, the elected members, our elected representatives, have come from various parts of the country. So it means that they're representing people of different areas of the country, which means everyone is being represented at the parliament. They together will then come to a consensus about the laws that have to be made. One person alone can't be taking all the decisions. Now, you would say, well, we have a very strong prime minister. Yes, we definitely do have a very strong prime minister, but the prime minister solely by himself cannot do whatever he wants to do. He has his council of ministers backing him, supporting him, advising him. And secondly, there is the opposition, which will always be questioning the government in power. In case the government fails to answer those questions, there will be a vote of no confidence, and if they lose, then the government falls. You've mostly covered all of this in Form 8. So hopefully the portion we cover in Form 9 Civics should not be very problematic or should not be something very new either. Alright, now to have a look at the first feature, major decisions are taken by elected leaders. We have an example of Pakistan here, where General Pervez Musharraf, he led a coup, a military coup in October 99, and he overthrew the democratically elected government, which means Pakistan already had a democratic government which had been elected. But this military general comes, Pervez Musharraf, and he overthrows that government. And then he goes on to declare himself as the president of the country. Later in 2002, he held a referendum which granted him a 5-year extension. Now, what is a referendum? A referendum is where it's a very simple vote of yes or no. Now, you may question here that he held a referendum in the country, which means he's letting people vote yes or no, whether they wanted him or whether they did not want him. He must have won that referendum, whereas a lot of people must have said yes, they want him, and so he gets an extension of 5 years. Sounds very democratic election sort of a thing, right? But you need to keep in mind that he was a military dictator, so he must have threatened people. At various polling booths, his officers must have made sure that everyone votes in Musharraf's favor. Otherwise, they were threatened or they were warned against it. They were warned that there would be consequences if they did not vote in favor of Musharraf. So people were forced to vote for him, which means nothing of a democratic nature was taking place. Anyway, after doing this referendum in 2002, he passed something called as the Legal Framework Order, in which he allowed other ministers or other elected representatives to have some power, but it's believed that it was farce, which means just for the sake of it, he said that, see, all the members here, ministers here have powers, but in reality, and they are democratically elected, but in reality, all the decisions were only being taken by Musharraf and his men. So, was it really a democracy? It was not. Elections did happen, but there was nothing democratic about it. Our second feature is free and fair electoral competitions or free and fair elections. We have an example of China. Now, in our country, we know elections are held every 5 years. In China also, elections are held every 5 years. Now, what is the difference between elections in our country and elections in China? In our country, we have various parties which stand for elections. And you can go out, if you're above 18, you can go out and vote for anyone you want to. No party is threatened by another party. However, in China, elections were happening every 5 years. People did have an option to vote for any party, but in reality, there was only one party who was the most powerful and controlled all the other smaller parties. So even if someone from a smaller party got elected eventually, that person had to work under this main one party. So we're going to have a look at it. This party, the dominant party in China is the National People's Congress. Now, if anyone has to stand for elections in China, they have to take permission of this Chinese Communist Party. The parliament of China is called the National People's Congress, and in that the most dominant party is the Chinese Communist Party. So if anyone has to stand for elections, they have to ask this party. The government is always formed by the Communist Party. So although elections are happening here, these elections are not free and they're not fair. Another example we have is of Mexico. In Mexico, until 2000, elections were being held. In fact, they were held every 6 years. But they were always won by only one party called the PRI, or the Institutional Revolutionary Party. This shows that elections are happening, but opposition is not strong. People don't have a lot of options to choose from. And the fact that others are so scared to stand against one dominant party means it is just one party which is controlling all the affairs. So elections are not free and fair. The next feature is one person, one vote and one value. Now, let's have a look at India once again before we dwell into the example of your syllabus or your textbook. In India, for example, when I go out to vote, I'm above 18 years of age, I can go out to vote because anyone here in India We have universal adult franchises, so anyone can vote irrespective of caste, creed, gender. So when I cast a vote, me, one person, that is only going to be counted as one vote. It's just going to have one value. However, in certain other countries like Saudi Arabia, Estonia and Fiji, everyone does not have the right to vote. And secondly, even if they do, one person's vote may have less value than another person's vote. We're going to see this in later chapters also, where especially a lot of discrimination is done on the basis of gender, even in courts for that matter. So for example, the testimony of two women would be equal to the testimony of one man. So which it should simply be the testimony of one woman is equal to the testimony of one man. But then we see different things happening. We'll do that in the chapter related to rights. All right. In a lot of countries, we find the denial of the equal right to vote. In fact, until 2015 in Saudi Arabia, women did not have the right to vote. In Estonia, the citizenship rules were made in such a way that the Russian minority found it very difficult to vote. Remember, in India, we do say that the majority religion is Hindus, and we have a lot of minority communities like the Muslims, the Jains, the Parsis. However, everyone gets an equal right to vote, and everyone's vote has an equal value. But this was not happening in Estonia. In Fiji also, the vote of an indigenous Fijian had more value than that of an Indian Fijian. Indigenous would mean someone who locally or actually originally belongs to that place. So this means democracy, all the elections are happening and democracy is not really being practiced in the way it should be, or it's just not democracy. Next feature is rule of law and respect for rights. What does rule of law means? Well, in India we have rule of law. Here it means that law is supreme. Anyone and everyone, once again, irrespective of caste, creed, color, gender, status, occupation, everyone is equal in the eyes of the law. And everyone has something very basic known as fundamental rights, which again we look at in detail in a later chapter. So yeah, anyway, a democracy should have rule of law and respect for rights, but here we're going to see an example of Zimbabwe where this was not happening. Well, Zimbabwe gained independence from white minority rule in 1980, and from then the country was ruled by a party called ZANU-PF. Their leader was Robert Mugabe. He very recently died a few months back. However, now in Zimbabwe, elections were being held very regularly. And the ZANU-PF was very popular. Robert Mugabe, their leader, was also very popular. So people who always, in general, they were voting for him and they were very happy with him. But the other practices of Robert Mugabe were not very democratic, which means there is more to simple voting which happens in a democracy. What does this mean? It means that nobody in that country had the right to criticize the president or Mugabe. It's a very different scene in India. In India, because we're a democracy, the right to criticism, to critically analyze the acts of the government are allowed to us. We can do it through freedom of speech and expression, but this was not allowed in Zimbabwe. TV and radio were controlled by the government, and they only gave one perspective of the government. And if they're only giving the perspective of the government was always correct. Also, there were newspapers, but journalists who wrote against the government were harassed. So nobody could mention anything against the government. So does this seem like a democratic government to you? You may say elections are happening, everyone loves their leader Robert Mugabe, but no, it's not democracy. Why is it not democracy? Because the right to criticism does not apply here. It's really that simple. In India today, you may not like the present ruling government. They may have done a lot of things you may not like. The government before them must have done a lot of things you may have not liked, but you could have easily opposed them. However, remember, in India, you can oppose the government, but if it leads to violence, then you can be in trouble. So, but as long as it doesn't lead to violent activities, you can openly criticize the government between your family and your friends, and even in institutions like our school, where we can analyze. The idea is not to just criticize and blame them, but analyze and think the ways in which they can be better. Anyway, so the example of Zimbabwe tells us that it was not a democratic country. So, in short, we can deduce or we can understand that in democracy, we have a government in which rulers are elected by the people, and they take all the major decisions. All the elected rulers, all the elected representatives take the major decisions. Then elections offer a choice and fair opportunity to the people, which means you can vote for anyone you want, and you can also change the government the next time. Just because I voted for person A this time does not mean I have to vote for the same person again. I can then vote for B and then C and then D. I have numerous options to choose from. Now, the choice of choosing and voting is equal to everyone on an equal basis, once again, irrespective of caste, creed, color, gender, occupation, status. Everyone is free to choose who they want. The only thing is that under universal adult franchise, everyone is free to choose their rulers, but you have to be above the age of 18, 1-8. Alright, then the exercise of this choice leads to a government limited by basic rules of the constitution and citizens' rights. It means now, so there are 4 basic features, and the last one here means you've elected a democratically, you've elected a government in a democratic manner. There were free and fair elections. Everyone's vote had equal value. Everyone could choose. But this government cannot do anything and everything they want. In fact, they have to follow some rules. These rules are laid down in a rule book called the Constitution. It's actually a very big, fat, thick book, and we'll again look at it in detail in the later chapters. So the Constitution has these rules which the government has to follow. It limits the powers of the government. It means that the government cannot behave in an arbitrary manner. And another way in which the powers of the government are limited are by the fundamental rights of the citizen, which means that the government violates any of these rights, the citizens can then go to the courts. The judiciary. Alright, then as we move ahead, we look at why democracy. Over here we're going to see the pros and cons of democracy, which means the good features as well as the bad features, arguments against democracy and arguments in favor of democracy. It means although democracy is the most ideal, although democracy has problems, it is going to be the most ideal form of government. But even though it's so nice and popular, it has problems, which also kind of teaches us that everything else always will have a problem. Anyway, alright, so the cons of democracy, which means arguments against democracy. What are the things which say that democracy is not very nice? Well, leaders keep changing in a democracy, leading to instability, which means every 5 years we vote for our leaders and they may change, the government may change, which also means that the new government which is elected may change the laws that were implemented by the previous government, and there can be a lot of confusion and instability and changing of rules and regulations and working. Then democracy is all about political competition and power play, leaving no scope for morality. What this means that a lot of time during elections, we see people using unfair means, like they distribute alcohol, they give a lot of money, there's a lot of corruption. They also ask people to vote for them on the basis of religion. They should not be doing any of this according to the model code of conduct, but they do. In reality, we know things are sadly very different. It's like a demerit of democracy. Now, third, many people have to be consulted in a democracy, and that leads to delays. It means there are so many people who've been elected. Now, all these people together are supposed to come to a consensus and decide for something. Because there are so many people, it's just going to take longer to come to a decision, versus where there was only one man who had to decide and he would make a quick decision. But since there are so many people who have to sit and discuss, it takes longer, which leads to delays, and sometimes these delays are not good. In times of emergency, delays can be very problematic. Next, elected leaders do not know the best interest of the people, resulting in bad decisions. This means that um, just because a person has been elected by a people from a region does not always mean he knows the requirements of everyone living in that region. So it may backfire. Then democracy, of course, leads to corruption since it is based on electoral competition. I mentioned this above before. Then ordinary people don't know what is good for them, and probably they should not decide anything. What does this point mean? It means that we're very lucky that India has universal adult franchisee where everyone above the age of 18 can vote irrespective of caste, creed, gender. But India is also a highly illiterate country. People don't have a lot of exposure. They don't know what they really want. So they get carried away. When a leader makes these very tall promises, they believe everything the leader says and they vote for him. But once the elections happen, no work is actually done. The leader takes all of them for a ride, or the representative, in fact, the minister takes them for a ride, and then things backfire. So probably all ordinary people should not get the right to vote. So what do we understand from these cons of democracy? That probably democracy may not be the best form of government, but when we see the merits of democracy, or when we see arguments in favor of democracy, we'll realize that it definitely is the most ideal form of government. A democratic government is better government because it is more accountable. Accountable here means these elected representatives have to answer back to the people. Otherwise, in next elections, they will be voted out. And then people can always question them in the courts, in the judiciary. So they always have to answer to the people. So they're accountable. They cannot take everyone for a ride. In fact, we have an example here of India and China being hit by famines, and India responded in a very good manner, probably because the government was elected and the government was accountable of taking care of its people. We can also see right now when we're suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic, in India the government has taken enough measures. The government will be taking and has been taking measures to control the spread of this disease because it is accountable to the people. So the government, because it wants to control the disease, it cannot treat the people in any way that it wants, because it's a democracy. You have to respect the people, yet at the same time take care of things. You cannot be authoritarian. Next, democracy improves the quality of decision making. Well, in democracy we have a lot of leaders, a lot of representatives. It means everyone comes from different backgrounds, has different qualifications, different ways of thinking, different perspectives. Usually it is believed that more chefs spoil the broth. It means too many people getting together make things confusing. But if these people could simply sit and discuss and come to a proper conclusion, it could actually be very helpful, because there'll be more and better ideas with newer perspectives. Then democracy provides a method to deal with differences and conflicts. Once again, because people who are democratically elected come from different regions, they speak different languages, they practice different religions, and they have different castes. They will then know how the same differences can be seen as in a positive manner, and apply laws for that. Next, democracy enhances the dignity of the citizen. Well, a democracy gives citizens certain rights. It means which then keeps their dignity intact. Which means you cannot really differentiate between the poor and the rich, or differentiate amongst people on the basis of their caste or religion. Then democracy is better than other forms of government because it allows us to correct our own mistakes. Very important. Government does mistakes, it can be voted out the next time. But then later, when it realizes its mistakes and it does a better campaign against it, and it promises that it will fulfill its promises and work towards improving its mistakes, we can again get it back to power. Also, in a democracy, because we have opposition, the government in power cannot be doing anything and everything they want to, because the opposition will always be questioning them. So the government has to be on its feet and alert. Yeah, broader meanings of democracy. Well, so in general, we understand that democracy means there's a representative government. All the people are not ruling here, but their representatives who they have elected are ruling for them. So a majority is allowed to take decisions on behalf of the people through the elected representatives. Now, modern democracies, now the reason why, if you're saying, now we have this whole process of voting for people, but why can't all of us just start ruling the country together? Well, A, because there are too many of us, and B, it will just create more confusion. So we let people who are qualified enough to take this position, who willingly take this position as a representatives and then take decisions for us. Also remember, not every one of us may be politically inclined or be interested in making such laws and taking such decisions as governing the country. So then we elect people on our behalf. Yeah, it's also important to remember that a democracy allows its minorities to feel safe and not be discriminated against, because they have equal voting rights as well as political rights. Alright, so that gets us to the end of chapter 1, or chapter 2 rather, which is what is democracy, why democracy. It's a rather small chapter. I would like you to once again read the notes that I forwarded and then go through the questions that I have sent. If you all can get your hands on your textbook, which you can download as PDFs, kindly then quickly read through the chapter once again. Alright, thank you very much and take care.